Pema, what's your emergency? On the street. Hello? Sir? I can't hear you. Hello? They are burning!
Unmask the visitors before it's too late.
A thorough and well-reasoned analysis explaining why Kenjaku deserved to be the final boss and how, unfortunately, his potential was wasted. The main reason for classifying Kenjaku as a wasted villain lies in the character-driven subplots that Kenjaku family created and then chose to ignore entirely. The maternal connection to Yuji Itadori, Kenjaku gave birth to the story's protagonist. This is one of the manga's most unsettling and psychologically complex revelations. However, Yuji and Kenjaku never had a real conversation about it. There was no verbal confrontation, no ideological dispute, and no dramatic resolution between mother and son. Kenjaku's motherhood was reduced to a biological footnote to justify Yuki's physical resilience, squandering enormous emotional potential. The desecration of Suguru Geto's corpse. In Shibuya, we saw that Geto's body reacted on its own, attempting to strangle Kenjaku when Goho spoke to him. This opened the door to a fascinating internal struggle for control of his identity. In the end, this detail was completely ignored. Geto's will never manifested itself again, and the emotional significance of using that specific body faded as the sacrifice games progressed. To the collapse of lore and the mythology of sorcery. Kenjaku was the only living link to the best-kept secrets of the Jujutsu Kaisen universe. Throughout his 1,000 years of existence, he possessed absolute knowledge of the true origin of cursed energy and the nature of souls, the untold history of the Heian period and the primordial binding covenants, the secrets behind the creation of the cursed objects and the anatomy of Tengen. With his sudden death, all that accumulated mythology died with him. Sukuna, focused on satisfying his appetite and fighting worthy opponents, had no interest in explaining the world or debating the origins of things. He just wanted to fight. As a result, the manga ended with a huge number of unanswered questions about the inner workings of its own power system, confirming that removing Kenjaku prematurely stripped the work of its cultural depth. The collapse of the poetic parallel with Satoru Gojo. They often point out that Satoru Gojo's true ideological antithesis was not Sukuna, but Kenjaku. Gojo believed in preserving order through education. His goal was to protect the youth and nurture a new generation of strong allies who could change the corrupt world of sorcery from within, in an organic way. Kenjaku stood for the destruction of order through experimentation. He didn't want to educate or protect. He wanted to force an abrupt, violent, and unpredictable mutation on a global scale, not giving a damn how many generations might be wiped out in the process. Furthermore, The psychological factor that Kenjaku had taken over the body of Suguru Geto, Gojo's only and best friend, elevated this conflict to a deeply personal and painful level. The Shibuya incident worked brilliantly because it was the triumph of Kenjaku's psychological strategy over Gojo's absolute power. The natural resolution of this narrative arc required Gojo, or the direct legacy of his students, to defeat the entity that desecrated his best friend's corpse in a showdown where Gojo's educational philosophy would prove superior to Kenjaku's scientific nihilism. By shifting the climax to Sukuna, Gojo's death and Geto's desecration lost their emotional resolution. Kenjaku's downfall at the hands of a comic distraction felt disconnected from the series' foundational grief. For progress or stagnation? Kenjaku's presence raised a fascinating question. Does humanity have the right to remain stagnant in its current form if there is a possibility of evolving into something greater, even if that means chaos and suffering? This is at the heart of the great villains of speculative fiction. With Kenjaku eliminated and Sukuna left as the only obstacle, the philosophical question became alarmingly simple. Sukuna offers no path forward. He is simply the status quo of the savage age. The strong devour the weak. Defeating Sukuna became a matter of basic survival, not ideological evolution. The heroes no longer had to prove that the model of society proposed by Kenjaku was wrong or morally inferior. They simply had to prove that they could strike harder than Sukuna. The series traded a sophisticated existentialist debate about the fate of the human race for a complacent resolution in which good triumphs over evil simply because it manages to last longer in battle. The devaluation of the ideological climax, the abandoned fusion, an ideal of forced evolution born of utter boredom. His amoral curiosity drove him to fuse humanity with Tengen, giving rise to a cursed entity that would elude even his own ability to predict. This concept posed a terrifying philosophical and existential dilemma: the end of human individuality in pursuit of a mystical work of art. When Kenjaku is abruptly killed, this plot hook falls apart. The authority to activate the fusion is transferred to Sukuna as a mere contingency measure, but the King of Curses lacks the scientific or existential interest in seeing that new world. To him, it is merely a toy or a shield. The fact that the massive apocalyptic threat built up over hundreds of episodes ultimately falls into the hands of a character who couldn't care less about the fate of the cursed energy is clear proof that Kenjaku's thematic potential was squandered. The void in the paintings of death and the Kamo lineage. We were introduced to the horror of Noritoshi Kamo's experiments, the identity Kenjaku assumed during the Meiji era. This prompted a profound exploration of the ethics of sorcery, biological manipulation, and the oppression of traditional clans. The Choso siblings, Eso and Kechisu, were born out of the suffering inflicted by Kenjaku. Choso's forgiveness of Yuji and his joining the group of heroes were ultimately aimed at a showdown of justice against the father, who created them as meta-disposable tools. In the end, Choso never gets the direct resolution with his creator. His role in Kenjaku's downfall is indirect, and his emotional arc shifts toward physical sacrifice in the battle against Sukuna. The opportunity to dismantle the original sin of the sorcery clans, embodied in Kenjaku, was completely lost. The dismantling of corporate horror as the core of the danger. The design of the curses, Mahitos warping of souls, and the human transmutation were unsettling. Kenjaku was the pinnacle of this concept. A brain with a mouth that parasitizes warm corpses, forcing the reader and the characters to look upon the faces of their loved ones transformed into puppets of amorality. When the antagonism is reduced exclusively to Sukuna in the final chapters, the nature of the horror changes. With Sukuna, the danger lies in massive physical destruction, dismemberment, spatial rifts, and the obliteration of urban landscapes. It is a horror rooted in the fear of brute force. With Kenjaku, the danger lay in existential trauma. The loss of autonomy, the realization that your own mother or deceased teacher had been engineered or taken over by a cold, calculating mind for a millennia-long experiment. With Kenjaku's departure, the manga moved away from the psychological and visceral horror that had defined it and adopted a more conventional action style, where danger is measured by how much physical endurance the character has left, rather than how much damage their sanity can withstand. Eight, the dissonance of its descent and the tonal clash. Kenjaku was the embodiment of physical horror and the desecration of the sacred, having taken the body of Yuji's mother and the corpse of Gojo's best friend, Suguru Geto. That the downfall of a utilitarian sociopath of that magnitude would occur in the middle of a comedy sketch wearing costumes and performing on stage before being ambushed from behind feels less like an organic conclusion and more like a hasty emergency exit on the author's part to clear the slate and focus exclusively on the physical confrontation with Sukuna. A villain who threw the modern era into turmoil deserved a downfall where his ideals clashed directly with the new world he tried to shape. Nine, the loss of the climax for Yuji Itadori as a character. In the shonen tradition, the final showdown with the main antagonist often reflects the protagonist's growth, a clash not only of powers, but of identities. It was a grave mistake to deprive Yuji of this confrontation. Yuji spent the entire series searching for the meaning of a proper death, and fighting against his fate as a mere vessel. Facing Kenjaku, the being who planned his birth, altered his body, and used him as a disposable pawn, would have been the perfect culmination of his arc of emancipation and maturity. Since it was Yuta and Takaba who ended him, Yuji was robbed of the opportunity to confront the source of his own existential tragedy. The paradox of the contingency plan and scripted convenience. From a critical perspective, transferring control of the fusion to Sukuna via a last-minute rule feels like a plot contrivance designed to fix a rushed execution. If the author wanted to keep the threat of the fusion hanging over the heroes, why not let the man who spent a millennium designing it be the one to try to activate it? In the end, Kenjaku's death didn't eliminate the danger, it simply simplified it. The manga replaced a complex scenario, in which the sorcerers had to unravel Kenjaku's intricate plan while navigating the rules of the culling games, with a straightforward one: defeat Sukuna before he decides to use the self-destruct button he inherited. Final reflection: despite everything, I still love Gurgur Akutami's creation, both its best and worst moments in the Jujutsu Kaisen series. Kenjaku had everything it took to be the final boss. He was the driving force behind the plot, had the richest, most ancient backstory, a direct biological link to the protagonist, had committed an unforgivable emotional affront against the most powerful sorcerer, and had a plan that threatened the very existence of humanity. By relegating him to an unexpected death to leave Sukuna as the sole antagonist, Jujutsu Kaisen traded intellectual complexity, the horror of biological experimentation, and family drama for a climax based purely on physical exhaustion and traditional shonen combat. Kenjaku didn't fail as a concept. It was the work's final structure that chose to squander one of the most fascinating villains it had ever created.